George Peabody is often referred to as the father of modern philanthropy. As a disciple of Benjamin Franklin, Peabody combined hard work with frugality, punctuality, and a strong public spirit, making him the very first American who was known first and foremost for his charitable giving. Early life of George Peabody. George Peabody was born in 1795 in what was then South Danvers, now Peabody, Massachusetts. As one of 7 children in a poor family, George suffered some deprivation during his childhood and was able to attend school for only a few years after at the age of 12 due to finance problems. When he was a teenager, his father died, and as a result in 1811, he became a clerk while working in his brother's shop dry goods store to support his mother and his 6 siblings. During the War of 1812, he volunteered for 2 years as an artillery soldier and did active military duty at Fort Warburton, which commanded the river approach to the city of Washington capital. While serving as a volunteer, Peabody met Elisha Riggs, who in 1814 provided financial backing for his new company called Riggs, Peabody and Company, which the firm specialized in importing dry goods from Britain. The business flourished, and within 3 years, Peabody was worth $40,000, repaying his father's debt and providing a more comfortable life for his family. In 1816, he moved to Henry Fite House in Baltimore, Maryland, where he made his career as a business and financier and would live for the next 20 years. In 1827, Peabody visited England for the first time, seeking to use his firm and his agency to sell American states bonds issued to raise capital for those states' various programs of internal improvements, mainly the transportation infrastructure such as roads, railroads, docks, and canals. At that time, London, Amsterdam, Paris, and Frankfurt were at the center of international banking and finance. As all international transactions were settled in gold or gold certificates, a developing nation like the United States had to rely upon agents and merchant banks to raise capital through relationships with merchant banking houses in Europe. When Riggs retired in 1829, the firm was renamed to Peabody Riggs and Company, with the name reversed as Peabody became the senior partner. When Riggs retired in 1829, the firm was renamed to Peabody Riggs and Company, with the names reversed as Peabody became the senior partner. Over the next decade after Riggs' retirement from the company, Peabody made 4 more transatlantic trips, starting in 1835 and establishing a branch office in Liverpool. Later in 1837, he established the banking firm of George Peabody and Company, located in London. However, the firm was not considered a legal establishment until 1851. The firm was founded to meet the increasing demand for securities issued by the American railroads, and although Peabody continued to deal in dry goods and other commodities, he increasingly focused his attention mainly on merchant banking. In his early years in London, American state governments were notorious for defaulting on their debts to British lenders, and as a prominent American financier in London, Peabody often faced scorn for America's poor credit. Due to this problem, Peabody took Junius Spencer Morgan, father of John Pierpont Morgan, into partnership, and in 1854, the original name of the banking firm changed from George Peabody and Company to Peabody Morgan and Company. During the run on the banks of 1857, Peabody had to ask the Bank of England for a loan of 800,000 euros, and although other banks tried to force Peabody's bank out of business, it managed to emerge with its credit intact. Following this crisis, later on, Peabody began to retire from active business, and in 1864, under Junius' control of the company, he changed the name to J.S. Morgan & Co. Not until in 1875, when Junius' son, John Pierpont Morgan, took over the company and later renamed the company to what is now known as J.P. Morgan & Co. Life during his philanthropy journey. As a disciple of Benjamin Franklin, Peabody was a pioneer whose success in philanthropy set a new standard for American millionaires. Though savvy, even miserly with his employees and relatives, Peabody gave generously to public causes. He became the acknowledged father of modern philanthropy, having established the practice later followed by some of the well-known people such as Johns Hopkins, Andrew Carnegie, John D. Rockefeller, and Bill Gates. All of his charitable activities were aimed towards improving society and particularly at providing the less fortunate with the means to improve themselves. Some critics implied that his motive was boast, but there seemed to be little evidence of this in his personality. An 1831 letter from Peabody to his nephew David Peabody, written from London and now in the collection of Peabody's papers at the Essex Institute, provides the best insight into the reasons for his philanthropy. In his letter, he stated, "Deprived as I was of the opportunity of obtaining anything more than the most common education, I am well qualified to estimate its value by the disadvantage I labor under in the society in which my business and situation in life frequently throws me, and willingly would I now give 20 times the expense attending a good education could I possess it. But it is now too late for me to learn, and I can only do to those that come under my care as I could have wished circumstances had permitted others to have done by me." End quote. And so in the early 1850s, Peabody's interest began to turn into philanthropy. For his hometown of Danvers' 1852 centennial celebration, he announced his plans to build the first Peabody Institute library. In 1857, he founded the Peabody Institute of Baltimore, which provided Baltimore with a research library, scholarly lectures in the humanities and sciences, an academy of music, and a gallery of art. He also built other Peabody Institute libraries in other states, such as in Vermont and Washington, D.C. In March 1862, Peabody wrote a letter to the Times of London announcing his intention to create the Peabody Donation Fund, since renamed the Peabody Trust, initially funded with $150,000. Peabody's trust was mainly chartered to build affordable housing for the working and poor people of London, which the operation continues to this day. Peabody's philanthropy was recognized throughout London, and on July 10, 1862, he was made a Freeman of the City of London, the motion being proposed by Charles Reed in recognition of his financial contribution to London's poor. He became the first of only 2 Americans, the other being Dwight D. Eisenhower, to have received the award. In 1867, the Peabody Education Fund was established with 2 million fund kits, and it was earmarked for education development in the poorest areas of the United States and South America. Peabody offered relatively small seed grants to countries and districts, requiring local leaders to provide matching funds and charter the school under state legislation. The Peabody Education Fund worked for 47 years, promoting and sustaining public schools and funding Teachers Training Institute throughout the South. Other education and charitable organizations set up by George Peabody include the Peabody Institute Library at Peabody Institute of the Johns Hopkins University, Peabody Museum of Archaeology and Ethnology at Harvard University, and the Peabody Museum of Natural History at Yale University. Life after death and the impact. Towards the end of his life, Peabody was approached by a friend of the Queen's private secretary to see if he would accept a baronetcy before returning to the United States. He politely declined, but received instead a letter of gratitude from Queen Victoria for his benefaction and asking that he accept a miniature statue of herself. Hearing that he was ill, she hoped he could visit Windsor to recuperate, but the gravity of his illness prevented that. On November 4, 1869, at the age of 74, Peabody died in London at the house of his friend Sir Curtis Lampson. His will provided that he be buried in the town of his birth, South Danvers, Massachusetts. He was laid to rest in Harmony Grove Cemetery in Salem, Massachusetts on February 8, 1870. Throughout his life, George Peabody is known to have provided benefactions of more than $8 million. Even more important was the institutional framework that Peabody devised of a permanent professional foundation run by experts in philanthropy who were guided by and indeed invented the best practices of the day. The American way was for the self-made millionaires to become self-made philanthropists, a model perfected in The Next Generation by Andrew Carnegie and John D. Rockefeller. They agreed with Peabody that riches produced a duty to give most of its back to the community through specialized permanent foundations. And with that in mind, that is the end of the brief history of the man widely regarded as the father of modern philanthropy.